Ambassador Zethkar had seen many worlds in his 3 centuries of life. As the Galactic Council's chief diplomatic envoy, he had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, negotiated peace treaties between warring species, and mediated disputes over resources that spanned entire star systems. Yet nothing had prepared him for this moment. Standing on the observation deck of the human vessel Determination, watching humanity prepare for war. The ship itself was a marvel of engineering that defied galactic convention. Where other species built their vessels with smooth curves and elegant lines, humans had created something that looked like it had been forged in the heart of a dying star. Angular surfaces, brutal efficiency, and weapon systems that made Zethkar's translator implant struggle to find appropriate words in his native tongue. Captain Sarah Chun stood beside him, her weathered face reflecting the cold light of distant stars. She was younger than Zethkar by nearly 2 centuries, yet her eyes held depths that spoke of experiences no diplomatic training had prepared him to understand. Those eyes had been haunting him since their first meeting 3 days ago. "Ambassador," Chun said, her voice carrying that peculiar human quality that could be both gentle and terrifying. "I know this is difficult for you to process. Your species has known peace for 12,000 years. Mine has known war for 12,000 years. We're fundamentally different creatures." Zethkar's 4 arms trembled slightly as he adjusted his ceremonial robes. His people, the Velthari, had evolved past violence before they had discovered fire. Their greatest conflicts were philosophical debates that lasted decades and ended with elaborate tea ceremonies. The concept of organized violence, of systematic destruction, was as foreign to him as breathing underwater. "I don't understand," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your species achieved faster-than-light travel 500 years ago. You've had access to galactic trade, diplomatic solutions, peaceful resource sharing. Why this? Why now?" Chun turned to face him, and Zethkar saw something in her expression that made his blood run cold. It was the same look he had observed in the eyes of every human he had encountered aboard this ship. A distant, calculated emptiness that his people had no name for. "Because the Korthax hegemony has made it clear that diplomacy is not an option," she replied. "They've declared humanity a pest species to be exterminated. They've already glassed 3 of our outer colonies. 17 million civilians, Ambassador, gone in a matter of hours." The numbers meant nothing to Zethkar. His people measured time in centuries and thought in terms of geological patience. But the way Chun spoke those numbers, like each digit was carved from her own flesh, made him understand that 17 million was not a statistic to humans. It was 17 million individual tragedies, each one burning in their collective memory. "Surely the Galactic Council can intervene," Zethkar said, grasping for familiar diplomatic frameworks. "Economic sanctions, trade embargoes, mediated negotiations. There are protocols. The protocols assume both parties want peace," Chen interrupted, and for the first time, Zethkar heard something crack in her professional composure. "The Korthax don't want our resources, Ambassador. They don't want our territory. They want us dead. All of us. Every man, woman, and child in human space." Through the observation deck's massive viewport, Zethkar could see the human fleet assembling. Ships that had once carried colonists and cargo had been transformed into instruments of war with terrifying efficiency. The logistics alone boggled his mind. In the 3 months since the first Korthax attack, humanity had converted 40% of their industrial capacity to military production. "How?" he asked, not sure he wanted to hear the answer. "How does a species mobilize so completely, so quickly?" Chen's smile was perhaps the most disturbing thing Zethkar had ever seen. It held no joy, no warmth, only a grim satisfaction that spoke of dark preparations finally reaching fruition. "Because we never stop being ready for this moment," she said. "Every human child learns about the wars of the past, not as ancient history, but as instruction manuals. We remember how our ancestors fought, how they won, how they died. We carry those lessons in our DNA. She gestured toward the tactical displays showing ship movements, supply chains, and battle formations. The complexity was staggering. Hundreds of thousands of vessels moving in perfect coordination, millions of personnel executing orders with machine-like precision. It was beautiful in its terrible efficiency. Your people wonder why we maintain such large militaries during peacetime, Chen continued. Why we study warfare when we could be studying art or philosophy? The answer is simple. Peace is a luxury we've never been able to afford for long. There's always been someone willing to take what we've built to destroy what we've created. Zethkar watched a squadron of fighters perform training maneuvers outside the viewport. The pilots were barely old enough to vote by human standards, yet they flew their deadly machines with the casual expertise of master craftsmen. Their movements were precise, economical, and utterly without hesitation. But the cost, he whispered. The resources you're dedicating to destruction could feed entire worlds, could advance science, could be meaningless if we're all dead, Chen finished. Ambassador, let me show you something. She led him through the ship's corridors, past crew members who moved with purpose and efficiency that made Zethkar's diplomatic training seem sluggish by comparison. Every face he saw bore that same distant expression, as if they were all looking at something far beyond the present moment. They arrived at the ship's museum, a small chamber that Chen explained was standard on all human vessels. The walls were lined with artifacts from humanity's long history of warfare. Ancient weapons, battle flags, and holographic displays showing conflicts that span millennia. This is the sword of Alexander the Great, Chen said, indicating a corroded blade behind protective glass. He used it to conquer most of the known world 3,000 years ago. And this is a rifle carried at the Battle of Stalingrad, where humans fought room by room for control of a single city. Zethkar stared at the primitive weapons, trying to comprehend the minds that had created them. Why preserve these things? Why glorify violence? Because they represent something you've never had to understand, Chen replied. The willingness to die for something greater than yourself. The ability to inflict and endure suffering for a principle, for survival, for the future of your species. She stopped before a holographic display showing the Battle of Earth during humanity's first interstellar war against an AI rebellion. Zethkar watched in fascination and horror as human defenders fought with impossible courage against overwhelming odds. We don't glorify violence, Ambassador. We remember it. We study it. We prepare for it. Because the universe is full of species like the Korthax who see compassion as weakness and peace as an invitation to attack. They returned to the observation deck, where the preparations continued with relentless efficiency. Zethkar noticed something he had missed before, the absolute silence. Thousands of crew members working in perfect coordination, but no unnecessary conversation, no casual banter. Everyone knew their role, their purpose, their place in the vast machine of war. Your crew, he observed. They're so quiet. Chen nodded. They're focused. When humans prepare for war, we become something different. Something your people have never needed to become. We call it the warrior's mind, a state where personal concerns, individual desires, even fear becomes secondary to the mission. She pointed to a young technician calibrating weapons systems. That woman has a PhD in astrophysics. In peacetime, she studies the birth of stars. Now she's calculating the most efficient way to destroy Korthax battle stations. The man beside her is a poet who's published 3 volumes of verse about the beauty of alien sunsets. Today he's programming targeting computers. Zethkar felt something cold settling in his stomach. You're saying they've abandoned who they are? No, Chen said firmly. They've become who they need to be. That's the difference between humans and most other species. We don't have the luxury of being just one thing. We're poets and killers, philosophers and soldiers, dreamers and destroyers. Whatever the situation demands. A communications officer approached, her young face bearing the same distant expression Zethkar had come to recognize. Captain, Admiral Morrison is requesting a final diplomatic briefing before the fleet departs. Very well, Ambassador, would you join us? The Admiral will want to hear the Galactic Council's position directly. They made their way to the briefing room, where Admiral Morrison waited with her senior staff. Zethkar had met the Admiral twice before, and each encounter had left him more unsettled. She was a small woman by human standards, barely reaching Zethkar's lowest shoulder, yet her presence filled the room like a gravitational field. Admiral, Zethkar began, falling back on diplomatic protocol. I must once again urge you to reconsider this course of action. The Galactic Council is prepared to offer mediation services, economic incentives for the Korthax to negotiate. Morrison's laugh was like breaking glass. Ambassador, the Korthax response to our last diplomatic overture was to broadcast the execution of human prisoners across all civilian communication channels. Children, Ambassador. They made sure children could see what they did to our people. The room fell silent except for the low hum of the ship's engines. Zethkar noticed that every human present had that same distant look, as if they were all seeing something beyond the present moment. But surely, he pressed, there must be some way to resolve this without such massive bloodshed. The loss of life on both sides will be acceptable, Morrison finished coldly, if it ensures the survival of our species. Ambassador, I know your people see us as barbarians. Primitives who resort to violence when civilized beings would find diplomatic solutions. You're not entirely wrong. She activated a holographic display showing the Korthax fleet movements. The enemy force was massive, easily outnumbering the human fleet 3-1. Yet the humans showed no sign of concern, only calculating interest as they studied the tactical situation. We are what the universe made us, Morrison continued. Billions of years of evolution on a world where everything wanted to kill us. Natural disasters, predators, disease, climate change. Our entire evolutionary history is a story of survival against impossible odds. We learn to adapt, to fight, to never surrender. She gestured to the display. The Korthax think this will be easy because they outnumber us. They think warfare is about having the biggest fleet, the most advanced technology. They don't understand that for humans, war is not about technology or numbers. It's about will. Zethkar stared at the tactical display, trying to process what he was seeing. The human fleet was smaller, their ships individually less powerful than Korthax vessels. Yet the Admiral spoke with complete confidence in victory. You believe you can win against such odds? I know we can, Morrison replied, and her certainty was more frightening than any threat. Because we've done it before throughout our history. When the odds were impossible, when defeat seemed certain, humans found a way. We adapted. We improvised. We endured. Captain Shin stepped forward. Ambassador, there's something about human warfare that your diplomatic training hasn't prepared you to understand. We don't just fight with weapons and ships. We fight with everything we are, everything we've learned, everything we've survived. She activated another display, showing human technological innovations from the past 3 months. New weapons systems, defensive technologies, tactical doctrines, all developed at a pace that defied galactic understanding of research and development timelines. When humans face an existential threat, Chen explained, we become something unprecedented. Every resource, every mind, every capability focuses on a single objective, victory. Not just military victory, but the complete elimination of the threat to our survival. Zethkar felt something like vertigo as he began to grasp the implications. You're not just preparing to fight the Korthax. You're preparing to destroy them entirely. The silence that followed was answer enough. Admiral Morrison's eyes held no apology, no doubt, only the cold calculation of someone who had already decided the fate of an entire species. The Korthax made this choice when they declared humans a pest species, she said finally. They wanted extermination. They'll get it. As the briefing concluded and Zethkar made his way back to his quarters, he found himself studying the faces of the human crew with new understanding. That distant look, that 1,000-yard stare, it wasn't emptiness or callousness. It was focus. It was the expression of a species that had decided to become something terrible and necessary. In his quarters, Zethkar activated his communication array to send a report back to the Galactic Council. But as he began to compose his message, he found himself struggling to find words that could convey what he had witnessed. How could he explain to a council of peaceful species that they were about to witness something unprecedented in galactic history? How could he describe the transformation of an entire civilization into an instrument of war? How could he make them understand that humanity's preparations weren't just military logistics, but the awakening of something that had been sleeping in their genetic code for millennia? He finally sent a simple message. The humans are not preparing for war. They are preparing to become war itself. I fear we have misunderstood the nature of this species entirely. As the determination prepared to join the fleet's final formation, Zethkar stood once again at the observation deck, watching the last of the preparations. The human fleet stretched across space like a constellation of death, each ship filled with beings who had transformed themselves from poets and philosophers into something their enemies would soon learn to fear. The war would begin soon, and Zethkar realized that regardless of the outcome, the galaxy would never be the same. Humanity had shown their true face, and it was both beautiful and terrifying in its absolute commitment to survival. The first shots of the war were fired in the Kepler 442 system, a strategic junction point that controlled access to 3 major trade routes. Zethkar watched from the bridge of the determination as the human fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, their arrival timed to the microsecond despite traveling from dozens of different staging areas across human space. The Korthax fleet was already waiting for them. Admiral Morrison stood at the center of the bridge, her small frame dwarfed by the massive tactical displays showing enemy positions. The Korthax had positioned themselves in a classic defensive formation around the system's primary space station, their triangular vessels gleaming like obsidian daggers against the backdrop of stars. Enemy fleet composition. Morrison asked, her voice carrying none of the tension that should accompany facing a force 3 times their size. 215 capital ships, approximately 800 smaller craft, reported the tactical officer. Standard Korthax battle doctrine. Heavy shields, plasma weaponry, superior numbers. Zethkar noticed that the young officer delivered this information with the same calm tone one might use to report the weather. Around the bridge, human crew members worked at their stations with mechanical efficiency, their faces bearing that same distant expression he had come to both recognize and fear. Signal from the Korthax flagship, announced the communications officer. They're demanding our immediate surrender. Morrison's smile was thin and cold. Put them through. The main screen flickered to life, revealing the alien visage of Korthax Supreme Commander Thekvar. The Korthax were an impressive species by galactic standards. Tall, muscular, with armored carapaces that had evolved on a high-gravity world. Their society was built around concepts of strength and domination, and they had never encountered a species they couldn't intimidate into submission. Human Admiral. Thekvar's voice boomed through the bridge speakers, translated into English by sophisticated linguistic algorithms. You face the full might of the Korthax Third Fleet. Surrender now, and your deaths will be swift. Morrison stepped forward, and Zethkar was struck by the contrast between the towering alien warrior and the diminutive human woman. By any rational measure, Thekvar should have been the more intimidating presence. Yet somehow, it was Morrison who dominated the conversation. Supreme Commander, she replied, her voice carrying a casual tone that seemed completely out of place given the circumstances. I have a counter-proposal. Withdraw your forces from human space, return our colonies to their rightful inhabitants, and we might let some of you live. The silence that followed was deafening. Zethkar could see Thekvar's confusion through the screen. This was clearly not the response the Korthax had expected from a numerically inferior force. You mock the Korthax hegemony with your weak words, human. We have destroyed entire civilizations. Your pitiful fleet will be scattered like dust before our might. Morrison's expression didn't change. Supreme Commander, you made a fundamental error in your calculations. You assume that because you outnumber us, you have the advantage. But you're forgetting something important about human nature. She gestured to her bridge crew, who continued their preparations without even glancing at the screen. We don't fight like other species. We don't retreat when the odds are against us. We don't surrender when faced with superior numbers. Instead, we do something that your evolutionary history has never prepared you to understand. Thekvar leaned forward, his massive form filling the screen. And what is that, human? We get creative. Morrison cut the communication, and immediately the bridge erupted into controlled activity. Orders flew between stations, but Zethkar noticed that every command had been anticipated, every movement prepared in advance. The humans weren't reacting to the situation. They had already planned for it. All ships, execute Formation Omega, Morrison announced. Begin Phase 1. What followed was unlike anything in Zethkar's understanding of space combat. Instead of the traditional approach of two fleets closing to engage in direct battle, the human ships scattered in what appeared to be a disorganized retreat. Korthak's commanders, sensing victory, ordered pursuit. That's when Zethkar began to understand the true nature of human tactical thinking. The seemingly chaotic human retreat was actually a carefully choreographed maneuver designed to separate the Korthak's fleet into smaller, more manageable groups. As the enemy ships spread out to pursue different human formations, they found themselves isolated and vulnerable. Phase 2, Morrison announced. Hidden amongst the asteroid fields and debris clouds that littered the outer system, human ships that had been waiting in complete radio silence suddenly activated their engines. They weren't reinforcements. They were the same ships that had appeared to retreat, having used the system's natural cover to reposition themselves. The Korthaks suddenly found themselves surrounded. Impossible, Zethkar breathed, watching the tactical display transform from a human retreat into a complex, three-dimensional trap. How did they coordinate such a maneuver without communications? Captain Chun, who had remained silent throughout the initial exchange, finally spoke. Ambassador, human military doctrine assumes that communications will be compromised, that plans will fail, that technology will malfunction. So we train our commanders to think independently while working toward a common objective. The first human attack came from an unexpected direction, below the plane of the ecliptic, where no rational commander would position attack ships. A squadron of human fighters, moving at velocities that should have been impossible for mancraft, struck the Korthak's rearguard like a hammer blow. Zethkar watched in horrified fascination as the human pilots executed maneuvers that would have killed any other species. They pulled accelerations that should have reduced their brains to liquid, executed turns that should have torn their ships apart, and maintained formation through maneuvers that defied both physics and common sense. How are they surviving those forces? He asked. Training, Chen replied simply. Human pilots begin acceleration conditioning in childhood. By the time they reach combat status, they can withstand forces that would incapacitate most other species. But, more importantly, they're willing to endure that punishment to complete their mission. The battle quickly developed into something that challenged every assumption about space warfare that galactic civilization had developed over millennia. The Korthaks, despite their technological superiority and numerical advantage, found themselves constantly outmaneuvered by human forces that seemed to anticipate their every move. Their tactical doctrine is flawed, Morrison observed, watching as another Korthaks formation fell into a human trap. They rely too heavily on superior firepower and frontal assault. They've never had to develop tactical flexibility because brute force has always been sufficient. A Korthaks battle group attempted to break through human lines, concentrating their fire on a single point. It was a textbook maneuver that should have succeeded. Instead, the human ships at that position simply weren't there anymore. Evasion Pattern Theta. Chen explained to Zethkar's unspoken question. Human ships are designed for maximum maneuverability. We sacrifice armor and firepower for speed and agility. When the enemy concentrates their fire, we simply move to where they're not shooting. The psychological effect on the Korthax was immediate and devastating. Their commanders had built their entire strategic philosophy around the concept of overwhelming force. When that force struck empty space while human weapons found their targets with surgical precision, their confidence began to crack. Human ships, this is Supreme Commander Thekvar, came the communication from the Korthax flagship. Your tactics are unconventional. We propose a temporary ceasefire to discuss terms. Morrison's laugh was genuinely amused. Supreme Commander, you declared humans a pest species to be exterminated. You made those terms very clear. We're simply responding in kind. You cannot hope to defeat our entire fleet. Watch us. What followed was a masterpiece of tactical coordination that would be studied in military academies for centuries to come. Human ships began executing a maneuver that their crews had practiced thousands of times but never used in actual combat: the Stellar Cascade. Small groups of human ships engaged Korthax vessels in what appeared to be suicide attacks, drawing the enemy into pursuit. As the Korthax chased these apparently desperate human forces deeper into the system, they found themselves drawn into overlapping fields of fire from human ships that had been repositioned during the earlier phases of the battle. Each Korthax ship destroyed weakened the overall enemy formation, creating gaps that human forces exploited with ruthless efficiency. The Korthax fleet, which had begun the battle in perfect formation with overwhelming numerical superiority, gradually dissolved into isolated groups fighting desperately against an enemy they couldn't predict or counter. Their supreme commander is requesting direct communication, reported the communications officer. Denied, Morrison replied without hesitation. We have nothing to discuss. Zethkar watched the battle unfold with growing horror and fascination. The Korthax were not weak or cowardly. They were an accomplished warrior species with millennia of military tradition. Yet against human tactical doctrine, their experience and numerical superiority meant nothing. The human approach to warfare was fundamentally different from anything in galactic military tradition. Where other species sought to overwhelm through superior technology or numbers, humans sought to break their enemies to fight through psychological warfare, tactical unpredictability, and absolute refusal to accept defeat. They're running, Chen observed, watching as scattered Korthax ships began attempting to withdraw from the battle. Morrison shook her head. No, they're regrouping. Korthax tactical doctrine includes a fighting withdrawal when faced with unexpected resistance. They'll attempt to form a defensive perimeter around their command ship and force us into a direct assault. She was correct. The surviving Korthax vessels, perhaps 150 ships from the original 215, formed a protective sphere around their massive flagship. It was a sound tactical decision that would force the humans to attack a heavily defended position with inferior numbers. They're learning, Morrison admitted. Good. This will make Phase 3 more interesting. Phase 3, Zethkar asked, though he was beginning to fear the answer. Morrison smiled, and, for the first time since the battle began, her expression held something like anticipation. Ambassador, thus far we've been demonstrating human tactical flexibility and adaptability. Now we're going to show the Korthax something that no other species in galactic history has ever witnessed. She turned to her communications officer. Signal all ships. Execute protocol Omega-7. The response from the human fleet was immediate and terrifying. Instead of the complex tactical maneuvers Zethkar had been observing, the human ships suddenly began advancing directly toward the Korthax defensive formation. Not in formation, not with tactical coordination, but in what appeared to be individual suicide runs. What are they doing? Zethkar demanded. They're throwing away every advantage they've gained. No, Ambassador, Chen replied, her voice carrying a tone he had never heard before, something like reverence mixed with pride. They're showing the Korthax what humans do when conventional tactics aren't sufficient. They're demonstrating why our species has never been conquered, why we've never surrendered, why we always find a way to win. Each human ship attacking the Korthax formation fought with an intensity that defied rational explanation. When their weapons failed, they used their ships as weapons. When their ships were damaged beyond combat effectiveness, the crews continued fighting with personal weapons. When faced with certain death, human crews chose to ram their vessels into enemy ships rather than surrender. The psychological effect on the Korthax was devastating. Their entire military tradition was built around the concept of rational self-preservation. When defeat became inevitable, surrender was acceptable. The idea of continuing to fight when victory was impossible, of choosing death over submission, was completely outside their evolutionary experience. Their crews are dying. Thekvar's voice came across the communications channel, no longer demanding or arrogant, but confused and frightened. Your ships are destroyed, your people are dying, yet they continue to attack. This is madness. Morrison's reply was calm and matter-of-fact. Supreme Commander, this is what humans call dedication to mission. Your species surrenders when the cost becomes too high. Ours fights harder. The Korthax defensive formation began to crack under the relentless human assault, not because of superior tactics or overwhelming firepower, but because the defenders could not comprehend the mindset of attackers who refused to acknowledge defeat. As the battle raged, Zethkar began to understand what he was witnessing. This wasn't just a military engagement between two species. It was a collision between fundamentally different evolutionary philosophies. The Korthax had evolved as apex predators who dominated through strength and intimidation. Humans had evolved as persistence hunters who succeeded through refusal to give up, regardless of the odds. The final phase of the battle came when the human ship Indomitable broke through the Korthax defensive perimeter and engaged their flagship in direct combat. The human ship was smaller, less heavily armed, and had already sustained significant damage. By any rational calculation, it should have been destroyed in minutes. Instead, it systematically dismantled the Korthax flagship through a combination of superior maneuverability, tactical innovation, and what could only be described as absolute refusal to lose. The complete destruction of the Korthax Third Fleet sent shockwaves throughout galactic civilization that extended far beyond the military implications. Zethkar found himself in the unprecedented position of being the only non-human witness to humanity's transformation into something that challenged every assumption about warfare, diplomacy, and the nature of intelligent life itself. 3 weeks after the Battle of Kepler 442, he stood in the Galactic Council chambers on Proxima Station, facing representatives of 47 different species, all demanding answers to questions he wasn't sure he could answer. The emergency session had been called after intercepted Korthax communications revealed the scope of human military capability. Ambassador Zethkar spoke Counselor Viridian of the Altarian Collective, her crystalline form flickering with anxiety patterns. Your report states that human forces destroyed a numerically superior fleet with minimal losses. Please explain how this is possible given known human technological limitations. Zethkar activated the holographic display, showing tactical recordings from the battle. Around the chamber, representatives from species that had never known warfare watched in stunned silence as human ships executed maneuvers that defied their understanding of space combat. Honorable counselors, he began, his voice carrying fatigue accumulated from weeks of trying to process what he had witnessed. I believe we have fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the human species. Our diplomatic assessments classified them as a moderate threat level based on their technology and fleet size. We failed to account for factors that don't appear in traditional military analysis. High Arbiter Keleth, the ancient leader of the Council, leaned forward on his floating throne. His species, the Vor-Hai, had been spacefaring for 20 millennia and had never encountered a tactical problem they couldn't solve through superior technology or diplomatic negotiation. Explain these factors, Keleth commanded. Zethkar hesitated. How could he convey concepts that his own people had no words for? How could he describe the transformation he had witnessed in human behavior when faced with an existential threat? The humans possess something we lack, he said finally. They call it tactical adaptability, but it goes deeper than mere flexibility in combat. When faced with impossible odds, instead of seeking diplomatic solutions or technological advantages, they change. He activated another recording, showing the moment when human forces had abandoned conventional tactics and begun their seemingly suicidal final assault. Around the chamber, alien representatives watched in fascination and horror as human crews continued fighting even as their ships were destroyed around them. This behavior appears irrational, observed Counselor Thane of the Regelian Confederacy. No intelligent species sacrifices valuable personnel and equipment when defeat is inevitable. The logical response is surrender and negotiation. That's exactly the point, Zethkar replied. Human logic operates on different parameters than ours. They don't calculate victory based solely on technological superiority or numerical advantage. They factor in elements that our species have never needed to consider. He paused the recording at the moment when a human ship, Indomitable, rammed the Korthax flagship after losing primary weapon systems. The alien representatives stared at the image in uncomfortable silence. They call this dedication to mission, Zethkar continued. The willingness to continue fighting regardless of personal cost, regardless of the odds, regardless of conventional wisdom. It's not just military doctrine, it's integrated into their entire evolutionary psychology. Counselor Meridia of the Centauri Republic raised a concern that had been troubling many representatives since the first reports arrived. Ambassador, if humans are capable of such extreme measures, what does this mean for galactic security? Are we facing a potential threat to peaceful civilization? The question hung in the air like a dark star, drawing all attention to Zethkar. He had been wrestling with the same concern since watching Admiral Morrison refuse the Korthax surrender. Had humanity revealed itself as a species that posed a fundamental threat to the galactic order? I don't believe so, he said carefully, but my assessment comes with significant caveats that the Council must understand. Human military capability isn't just about their technology or tactics. It's about their willingness to become something different when their survival is threatened. He activated a new series of recordings showing human preparations for the battle. The transformation of civilian ships into military vessels, the conversion of industrial facilities to weapons production, the mobilization of their entire society for war. In the 3 months between the first Korthax attack and the battle, humanity converted 40% of their industrial capacity to military production. They trained civilian crews for combat operations. They developed new weapons systems and tactical doctrines. Most significantly, they psychologically prepared their entire population for the possibility of species extinction. Arbiter Kelitha's ancient eyes studied the displays with growing concern. You're describing a militarization of an entire civilization. Such preparations suggest aggressive intentions beyond mere self-defense. With respect, honored Arbiter, I disagree, Zethkar said, knowing he was challenging millennia of diplomatic tradition. Human militarization is reactive, not proactive. They don't seek conquest, they seek survival. But their definition of survival includes concepts that we've never had to consider. He showed recordings from human colonies that had been attacked by the Korthax, focusing on the aftermath of the attacks rather than the destruction itself. Human survivors didn't just rebuild. They improved their defenses, studied their attackers' weaknesses, and prepared for future conflicts. Notice their behavior after suffering devastating losses, Zethkar observed. They don't seek revenge in the traditional sense. They seek to ensure such losses never happen again. But their methods of prevention are comprehensive. Counselor Viridian's crystalline form flickered with confusion patterns. Are you suggesting that human military preparations are defensive in nature? The recordings show weapons capable of destroying entire fleets. Yes, Zethkar replied. But consider the context. Humans don't build weapons to conquer other species. They build them to ensure no other species can conquer them. There's a significant difference, though the result may appear identical from outside observation. He activated the most disturbing recording from his time aboard the Determination, Admiral Morrison's briefing about human military doctrine. The assembled alien representatives listened in growing unease as the human admiral calmly explained their philosophy of total warfare. When humans face an existential threat, Morrison's voice echoed through the chamber. We don't just mobilize our military. We mobilize our entire civilization. Every resource, every mind, every capability focuses on a single objective, the complete elimination of the threat to our survival. The silence that followed was profound. Several representatives exchanged worried glances, while others activated private communication channels to consult with their home governments. Ambassador High Arbiter Kelleth said slowly, "You're describing a species that becomes exponentially more dangerous when threatened. How do we ensure galactic peace with such a variable in the equation?" Zethkar had been expecting this question, but the answer still troubled him. "Honored Arbiter, I believe the key lies in understanding human motivations. They don't want to be the dominant military power in the galaxy. They want to ensure they can never be forced into extinction." He showed a final recording, one that had surprised him more than any display of military might. It was footage from human colonies being rebuilt after Korthak's attacks, but the reconstruction included significant infrastructure for refugee assistance, medical aid for survivors of other species, and educational exchanges with alien civilians. Even while preparing for total war, Zethkar explained, humans continued their peaceful activities with other species. They maintained trade relationships, honored diplomatic commitments, and provided aid to alien refugees. Their military preparations targeted only those who threatened their survival. Counselor Thane studied the reconstruction footage with obvious confusion. This behavior seems contradictory. How can a species simultaneously prepare for total warfare while maintaining peaceful relationships? Because humans understand something we've forgotten, Zethkar replied. The difference between an enemy and a neighbor. They're capable of extreme violence against those who threaten them, while maintaining peaceful cooperation with those who don't. The implications sent ripples of unease through the chamber. Most galactic species had evolved past the point where such distinctions mattered. Their conflicts were usually resolved through diplomacy, economics, or limited military action. The idea of a species that could simultaneously embody both peaceful cooperation and total warfare was deeply unsettling. "What are you recommending, Ambassador?" asked High Arbiter Kelleth. Zethkar took a deep breath, knowing his next words would likely determine the galaxy's relationship with humanity for generations to come. "I recommend that we accept humans as they are, not as we wish them to be. They're not a threat to galactic peace. They're a guarantee of it, as long as no one is foolish enough to threaten their survival." The chamber erupted in debate as representatives argued about the implications of Zethkar's assessment. Some called for immediate military preparation against humanity, while others advocated for stronger diplomatic ties. But all of them were struggling with the same fundamental problem: how to coexist with a species that defied their basic assumptions about intelligent behavior. Through the chaos of alien voices, Zethkar noticed a new presence in the chamber. A human delegation had arrived, led by someone he didn't recognize, a woman in simple civilian clothing who radiated the same quiet intensity he had learned to associate with human leadership. The woman waited patiently for the debate to subside before speaking. Her voice carried none of the military formality of Admiral Morrison or Captain Chun, yet somehow commanded immediate attention from the assembled representatives. "Honored counselors," she said, her words automatically translated into dozens of languages. "I am Dr. Elena Vasquez, Secretary of Interspecies Relations for the Human Colonial Administration. I understand you've been discussing the implications of recent military actions by human forces." High Arbiter Kelleth studied the human diplomat with ancient eyes that had seen the rise and fall of civilizations. "Dr. Vasquez, the Council requires assurance that human military capabilities will not pose a threat to galactic peace." Dr. Vasquez smiled, and Zethkar was struck by how different her expression was from the cold determination he had observed on the warship. This was the face of humanity at peace, intelligent, curious, and genuinely concerned with the welfare of others. Honored Arbiter, I can provide that assurance, but only if the Council understands the conditions under which it applies. Humans have no desire for conquest, no interest in dominating other species, no ambition to expand our territory through force. We want to be left alone to develop our civilization in peace. She paused, and her expression grew more serious. However, if any species attempts to destroy us, to enslave us, or to deny us the right to exist, they will discover that humans are capable of becoming something they never anticipated. We will not be victims. We will not be conquered. We will not surrender. The chamber fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. This wasn't a threat or a boast. It was simply a statement of fact delivered with the same calm certainty that Zethkar had observed in human military officers. The Korthax learned this lesson, Dr. Vasquez continued. They declare humans a pest species to be exterminated. We responded by demonstrating that humans are, in fact, an apex predator species that has been pretending to be civilized for the sake of galactic peace. Counselor Viridian's crystalline form flickered with alarm patterns. Are you saying that human civilization is merely a facade covering a warrior species? No, Dr. Vasquez replied. Human civilization is genuine. We genuinely prefer peace, cooperation, scientific advancement, and cultural exchange. But we're also genuinely capable of becoming something terrifying when our survival is threatened. Both aspects are equally real, equally important, and equally human. She activated her own holographic display, showing images from human space during peacetime. Universities where alien students studied alongside humans, research stations where mixed-species teams worked on scientific problems, colonies where humans and aliens had built integrated communities. This is who we choose to be when we're not fighting for our lives, Dr. Vasquez explained. We're explorers, scientists, artists, philosophers, everything that makes life worth living. But we're also survivors, and survival sometimes requires capabilities that peaceful species find disturbing. High Arbiter Keleth contemplated her words for long moments before responding. Dr. Vasquez, the Galactic Council seeks to maintain peace between all member species. How can we ensure that human military capabilities don't destabilize galactic civilization? By ensuring that no species is foolish enough to threaten human survival, she replied simply. Ambassador Zethkar is correct in his assessment. Humans are not a threat to galactic peace. We're a guarantee of it. But that guarantee comes with the understanding that any species attempting genocide will face consequences that go far beyond traditional military response. The session continued for hours as alien representatives struggled to understand and accept humanity's dual nature. Some species, particularly those with their own histories of conflict, began to see humans as potential allies against future threats. Others, especially those that had never known warfare, viewed humanity with suspicion and fear. But all of them understood that the galaxy had changed. The emergence of human military doctrine had introduced variables that challenged thousands of years of diplomatic tradition. The age of purely peaceful resolution to galactic conflicts was over, replaced by a new paradigm where the threat of human retaliation served as a deterrent against species like the Korthax. As the session concluded and representatives departed to consult with their home governments, Zethkar found himself alone with Dr. Vasquez. The human diplomat studied him with curious eyes, clearly interested in his perspective on recent events. Ambassador, she said, I've read your reports on human military preparations. You seem to understand something about our species that many others have missed. Zethkar considered his response carefully. I believe I witnessed your species transform from peaceful explorers into something unprecedented. It was both fascinating and terrifying. Dr. Vasquez nodded. That transformation is always available to us, Ambassador. It's part of our evolutionary heritage, dormant most of the time, but ready when needed. The key to maintaining galactic peace is ensuring it's never needed again. As they parted ways, Zethkar realized that his role as ambassador had fundamentally changed. He was no longer just a diplomatic envoy. He had become the bridge between humanity and a galaxy that was still learning to understand what humans could become when pushed too far. 6 months after the Galactic Council session, Zethkar found himself aboard a human research vessel in the Tau Ceti system, observing something that challenged his understanding of human nature even more profoundly than their military capabilities. The scientific endeavor was conducting a joint research mission with 17 different alien species, studying the formation of stellar nurseries in this remote region of space. What disturbed him wasn't the research itself, but how completely the humans had returned to their peacetime nature. The same species that had systematically dismantled the Korthak's Third Fleet now worked alongside alien colleagues with genuine warmth, intellectual curiosity, and collaborative spirit. Dr. Sarah Kim, the mission's chief xenobiologist, was explaining human cellular structure to a fascinated group of Centauri scientists with the same patient enthusiasm that Admiral Morrison had shown when discussing weapon systems. The adaptability extends beyond military applications, Dr. Kim was saying, her eyes bright with scientific passion. Human cellular structure evolved to handle extreme environmental variations, which is why we can survive on worlds that would be toxic to most other species. Zethkar watched the interaction from the observation deck, noting how naturally the humans transitioned between their roles as researchers, teachers, and collaborators. There was no trace of the cold efficiency he had witnessed during military preparations, no hint of the calculated violence they were capable of deploying. Fascinating, isn't it? The voice belonged to Dr. Marcus Webb, the ship's chief psychologist, and one of the few humans who had been willing to discuss their species' dual nature openly. He was a tall man with gentle eyes who somehow managed to look both scholarly and dangerous, a combination that Zethkar was learning to recognize in many humans. "I'm trying to understand," Zethkar replied. "6 months ago, I watched your species prepare for total warfare with systematic efficiency. Today, I see the same individuals engaged in peaceful scientific research with equal dedication. The transformation is complete." Dr. Webb nodded, settling into a chair beside the alien ambassador. "It's not really a transformation, though. Both aspects exist simultaneously in human psychology. We call it contextual adaptation, the ability to become whatever the situation requires while maintaining core behavioral patterns." He gestured toward the research teams working throughout the ship. "Every person you see here was either directly involved in military operations against the Korthaks or supporting those operations in some capacity. Dr. Kim designed biological weapons targeting Korthak's physiology. Commander Torres over there piloted a fighter squadron in 3 separate battles. Chief Engineer Patel developed new propulsion systems specifically for combat applications. Zethkar studied the individuals Dr. Webb had mentioned. Dr. Kim was laughing at something one of her alien colleagues had said, showing no signs of someone capable of creating weapons of mass destruction. Commander Torres was helping a young Altarian technician calibrate sensor equipment with infinite patience. The dichotomy was profound. How is such rapid psychological adaptation possible? Zethkar asked. "My people require generations to adjust to new paradigms. Most galactic species show similar limitations. Because we've never had the luxury of single-purpose existence," Dr. Webb explained. "Human survival has always required the ability to shift between roles rapidly and completely. A farmer might need to become a warrior when raiders attacked, then return to farming when the threat passed. A scientist might need to become a weapons designer during wartime, then resume pure research when peace returned." Through the viewport, Zethkar could see the stellar nursery they were studying, vast clouds of gas, and dust where new stars were being born. The irony wasn't lost on him. The humans, who had proven capable of destroying entire fleets, were also among the galaxy's most dedicated students of creation. "Dr. Webb," he said carefully, I need to ask something that's been troubling me since the battle. When Admiral Morrison refused the Korthak surrender, when human forces continued fighting against defeated enemies, was that really necessary? Or was it something else? The psychologist was quiet for a long moment, studying the stellar formations outside. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that reminded Zethkar of the military officers he had observed during combat preparations. Ambassador, what you witnessed wasn't cruelty or unnecessary violence. It was something far more calculated and, in its way, more terrifying. It was a message. A message. The complete destruction of the Korthak's fleet wasn't just military necessity. It was a demonstration intended for every other species in the galaxy. Humans were establishing a precedent. Any species that attempts genocide against humanity will face total annihilation, regardless of surrender, regardless of pleas for mercy, regardless of diplomatic intervention. Zethkar felt a familiar chill. Even in their peaceful research environment, discussing stellar formation and collaborative science, humans remained capable of such cold calculation. But surely, he said, such extreme responses risk destabilizing galactic civilization. Other species might view humans as a threat requiring preemptive action. Dr. Webb shook his head. Actually, the opposite has occurred. Our intelligence networks report that several aggressive species have canceled expansion plans that would have brought them into conflict with peaceful neighbors. The human precedent, as they're calling it, has become a deterrent against the kind of behavior that destabilized the galaxy for millennia. He activated a data pad, showing intelligence reports from across human space. Since the Korthak's defeat, we've recorded an 18% decrease in interspecies military conflicts, a 23% increase in diplomatic resolutions to territorial disputes, and a 47% reduction in threats against civilian populations by militant species. The implications were staggering. Humanity's demonstration of total warfare capability had actually reduced violence across the galaxy by making aggressive species recalculate the potential consequences of their actions. The galaxy is safer, Zethkar said slowly, because other species are afraid of provoking humanity. Afraid of provoking unnecessary human retaliation, Dr. Webb corrected. There's an important distinction. Species that maintain peaceful relationships with their neighbors have nothing to fear from humanity. We have no interest in conquest or domination. But species that attempt genocide, well, they've seen what happens. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from a bridge. Captain Jennifer Martinez, the scientific Endeavor's commanding officer, appeared on the nearby comm screen with an expression that made Zethkar's blood run cold. It was the same look he had learned to recognize during military preparations, focused, calm, and absolutely lethal. Dr. Webb, Ambassador Zethkar, please report to the bridge immediately. We have a situation developing. They made their way through corridors that had suddenly transformed from peaceful research spaces into something resembling a military command center. The change was subtle but unmistakable. Crew members moved with different body language, their casual scientific conversations replaced by efficient, purposeful communication. On the bridge, they found Captain Martinez coordinating with her senior staff and the alien research team leaders. The main display showed long-range sensor readings indicating the approach of an unknown fleet. Report, Dr. Webb said, and Zethkar noticed that the psychologist had unconsciously shifted his own demeanor to match the military tension on the bridge. 17 ships of unknown configuration approaching from the galactic rim, reported Lieutenant Commander Singh, the ship's tactical officer. They're not responding to communication attempts, and their approach vector indicates hostile intent. Dr. Yathera, the Altarian research team leader, studied the tactical display with obvious confusion. Captain Martinez, surely this is a misunderstanding. We are conducting peaceful scientific research. What possible reason would anyone have to threaten us? Captain Martinez exchanged glances with Dr. Webb before responding. Dr. Yathera, our research has produced some significant discoveries about stellar formation processes. It's possible that someone views our knowledge as strategically valuable. Zethkar watched the human crew's transformation with fascination and growing unease. These same individuals who had been discussing theoretical xenobiology an hour earlier were now analyzing weapon signatures and calculating defensive strategies with professional competence. Unknown vessels. This is Captain Martinez of the research vessel Scientific Endeavor. The captain broadcast on all frequencies. You are approaching a peaceful scientific mission operating under Galactic Council authority. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions. The response came in the form of weapons fire. The approaching ships, now close enough for detailed analysis, opened fire on the human research vessel without warning or explanation. What happened next demonstrated something about human nature that all of Zethkar's previous observations had failed to prepare him for. The transformation from research vessel to combat-ready warship occurred in less than 90 seconds. Defensive screens activated as hidden weapons systems emerged from what had appeared to be purely scientific equipment. The Scientific Endeavor-S engines, which had been operating at minimal power for research purposes, suddenly roared to life with output that shouldn't have been possible from a civilian vessel. All hands, combat stations, Captain Martinez announced, her voice carrying the same calm authority that Zethkar had heard from Admiral Morrison. Defensive Pattern Alpha. Protect our research partners at all costs. Dr. Kim, who had been explaining cellular biology minutes earlier, took her position at a weapons control station and began targeting the attacking ships with the same methodical precision she had applied to her scientific work. Commander Torres, who had been helping alien technicians with sensor calibration, now coordinated defensive maneuvers that kept the research vessel between the attackers and the more vulnerable alien ships. How is this possible? Dr. Yithera asked, her crystalline form flickering with panic patterns. This is a research vessel. Where did these weapons systems come from? Dr. Webb answered while monitoring casualty reports from the alien ships that had been caught in the initial attack. Doctor, human research vessels are designed with defensive capabilities because the universe can be dangerous. We prefer to conduct peaceful research, but we're prepared for situations like this. The battle was brief but decisive. The attacking ships, whoever they were, had clearly expected to encounter defenseless researchers. Instead, they found themselves facing a vessel that combined advanced scientific sensors with military-grade weapon systems and a crew trained for exactly this type of situation. When the last attacking ship was disabled, Captain Martinez immediately shifted focus to rescue operations. The same weapons that had destroyed the attackers were now being used to clear debris and provide emergency power to damaged alien research vessels. Medical teams to Shuttle Bay 3, she announced. We have injured Centauri researchers requiring immediate attention. Zethkar watched in amazement as human crew members transitioned seamlessly from combat operations to emergency medical response. Dr. Kim, who had been operating weapons systems moments earlier, was now leading a team to treat injured alien scientists with the same focused intensity she had brought to targeting enemy ships. I don't understand, he admitted to Dr. Webb. Your people switch between warfare and peacekeeping, between destruction and healing, as if these contradictions don't exist. They're not contradictions, Dr. Webb replied, helping coordinate medical supplies for the rescue effort. They're different tools for different situations. Humans learned long ago that survival requires mastery of both creation and destruction, peace and war, healing and harm. He gestured toward the medical teams working to save alien lives. The same hands that fire weapons can perform surgery. The same minds that calculate targeting solutions can solve complex scientific problems. The same hearts that steel themselves for combat can open themselves to friendship and cooperation. Over the following hours, as rescue operations continued and damaged ships were repaired, Zethkar observed something that challenges understanding even more than the rapid military transformation. The human crew showed genuine concern for their alien colleagues, working tirelessly to ensure everyone survived and received proper medical care. Why? He asked Dr. Webb during a brief break in the rescue operations. You could have left the alien ships to fend for themselves during the attack. Military doctrine would suggest protecting your own vessel first. Because they're our colleagues, Dr. Webb replied simply. They're our friends, our research partners, our fellow explorers. The fact that we're capable of violence doesn't mean we lack compassion or loyalty. Captain Martinez approached, her uniform showing the wear of 12 hours of continuous operations. Ambassador Zethkar, I've received word from Human Command about the identity of our attackers. They were pirates from the Outer Rim who apparently believed our research had uncovered something valuable. Pirates Zitkar repetit. Not a government force or military organization. Correct. Which means this incident falls under standard law enforcement rather than military response protocols. We'll turn over the survivors to Galactic Council security forces for prosecution. The distinction mattered, Zethkar realized. Humans differentiated between threats to their survival and ordinary criminal activity. Pirates merited capture and prosecution. Genocidal species merited total destruction. The scale of response was proportional to the nature of the threat. As the scientific endeavor resumed its research mission, with additional security protocols but continued dedication to peaceful exploration, Zethkar found himself grappling with a profound realization about human nature. They weren't simply a warrior species pretending to be civilized, nor were they peaceful researchers who happened to possess military capabilities. They were something unprecedented in galactic history, a species that had fully integrated all aspects of intelligent behavior into a coherent whole. Humans could be explorers and soldiers, scientists and warriors, healers and destroyers, often within the same individuals and sometimes within the same day. They didn't see these roles as contradictory, but as different aspects of complete existence. The implications for galactic civilization were staggering. For the first time in recorded history, the galaxy possessed a species capable of guaranteeing peace through strength, protecting the weak through their own capability for violence, and advancing knowledge while maintaining the ability to defend it. In his final report about the incident, Zethkar wrote, "Humanity represents evolution's answer to the fundamental problem of intelligent life. How to be strong enough to survive in a dangerous universe while remaining civilized enough to make that survival worthwhile. They have achieved something that may be unique in galactic history, the perfect balance between creation and destruction." As the research mission continued, with human and alien scientists working side by side to unlock the secrets of stellar formation, Zethkar began to understand that he had witnessed something far more significant than military victory. He had seen the emergence of a species that could guarantee the survival of galactic civilization not through conquest or dominance, but through the demonstration that some things, like the right to exist peacefully, were worth fighting for with absolute commitment. The galaxy would never be the same, and perhaps that was exactly what it needed. 2 years had passed since the Battle of Kepler, 442, and Zethkar stood once again in the Galactic Council chambers, but this time the atmosphere was drastically different. The emergency session had been called not to address a crisis, but to formalize something unprecedented in galactic history: the establishment of humanity as the galaxy's primary peacekeeping force. The transformation had been gradual, but inevitable. Following the destruction of the Korthax Third Fleet, aggressive species across the galaxy had begun reconsidering their expansionist policies. The mere possibility of provoking a human response had become a deterrent more effective than any diplomatic treaty or economic sanction in galactic history. High Arbiter Keleth, now appearing even more ancient than before, called the assembly to order. Honorable representatives, we convene today to address the proposal submitted by the Human Colonial Administration regarding the establishment of formal peacekeeping protocols. Dr. Elena Vasquez stepped forward, her appearance unchanged from their first meeting, but her role fundamentally transformed. She was no longer simply a diplomatic representative. She had become the architect of a new galactic order based on the principle that peace required the credible threat of overwhelming force. Honored counselors, she began, over the past 24 months, human peacekeeping forces have responded to 43 requests for intervention from member species. In each case, our involvement has resulted in the cessation of hostilities and the establishment of lasting, peaceful solutions. Zethkar activated his personal display, reviewing the cases Dr. Vasquez referenced. The pattern was remarkable. Territorial disputes that had raged for decades were resolved within weeks of human involvement. Aggressive species that had ignored diplomatic pressure for centuries suddenly became cooperative when faced with human peacekeepers. The Meridian conflict, Dr. Vasquez continued, highlighting the most significant example, had destabilized an entire sector for over 200 years. 3 different species claiming the same star system, each with historical justifications for their position. Traditional diplomatic efforts failed repeatedly. The holographic display showed the Meridian system before and after human intervention. 2 months of human peacekeeping had transformed a war zone into a shared research facility where the 3 species now worked collaboratively on advanced technology development. How did human forces achieve what centuries of diplomatic effort could not? Asked Councilor Meridia of the Centauri Republic. Dr. Vasquez smiled, and Zethkar noted that her expression combined both warmth and the subtle hint of steel that he had learned to recognize in human leadership. We offered each party something they valued more than exclusive control of the system, guaranteed security and shared benefits under human protection. The genius of the approach was in its simplicity. Rather than attempting to determine which species had the strongest historical claim, human negotiators had proposed joint development under human oversight. Each species received access to the resources they needed, while human peacekeeping forces ensured that none could drive out the others. But this arrangement requires permanent human military presence, observed Councillor Thane of the Rigelian Confederacy. Councillor Thane raises an important point, Dr. Vasquez acknowledged. Human peacekeeping forces maintain permanent presence only at the request of local governments, and only for as long as they desire our presence. We have no territorial ambitions, no interest in conquest, no desire for political control. She activated a new display showing withdrawal schedules from systems where human intervention was no longer needed. In 18 cases, human forces have already withdrawn after local parties reached stable agreements. In each instance, withdrawal occurred ahead of schedule because peace was established more quickly than anticipated. Zethkar studied the data with growing understanding. Human peacekeeping wasn't traditional military occupation. It was more like providing security services while local parties developed sustainable solutions to their conflicts. The humans maintained just enough force to prevent violence while encouraging cooperative problem-solving. What about the cost? Asked Councilor Viridian of the Altarian Collective. Human peacekeeping operations require enormous resources. What does humanity gain from these expenditures? Dr. Vasquez's answer surprised many in the chamber. Peace, Councilor Viridian. Simply peace. Human civilization has learned that maintaining peace is far less expensive than fighting wars. Every credit we spend on peacekeeping is a credit we don't have to spend on military defense. The economic analysis was compelling. Human defense expenditures had actually decreased significantly since they began peacekeeping operations, because the deterrent effect of their reputation made direct threats to human space increasingly rare. Dr. Vasquez, High Arbiter Keleth interjected. The Council requires clarification on human rules of engagement for peacekeeping operations. Under what circumstances do human forces resort to violence? The chamber fell silent as representatives waited for an answer that would define the future of galactic security. Dr. Vasquez took a moment to consider her response, and Zethkar could see her weighing the importance of her words. Honored Arbiter, human peacekeeping forces operate under strict rules of engagement designed to minimize casualties while ensuring mission success. We use force only when necessary to prevent greater violence, and we always use the minimum force required to achieve our objectives. She paused, and her expression grew more serious. However, any attack on human peacekeeping personnel, any attempt to commit genocide against civilian populations under our protection, or any action that threatens galactic peace will be met with the full force of human military capability. The implicit message was clear. Humanity would maintain peace through strength, but that strength was available for use when necessary. The memory of the Korthax fleet's fate served as a constant reminder of what full force meant in human terms. "What about species that refuse human peacekeeping?" asked a representative from the Outer Rim territories. "Will humanity respect the sovereignty of species that prefer to handle their own conflicts?" "Absolutely," Dr. Vasquez replied. "Human peacekeeping is offered, never imposed. We will not intervene in conflicts where all parties prefer to resolve matters independently. However, we will not tolerate actions that threaten galactic stability or civilian populations of peaceful species." Zethkar noticed the careful distinction in her language. Humanity respected sovereignty, but reserved the right to act when broader galactic security was threatened. It was a nuanced position that balanced non-interference with protective responsibility. The debate continued for hours as representatives grappled with the implications of formalizing human peacekeeping authority. Some species worried about human dominance, while others saw it as their best guarantee of security in an unpredictable universe. During a recess, Zethkar found himself alone with Dr. Vasquez in one of the station's observation lounges. Through the viewport, he could see human ships maintaining security patrols around the station, a reminder that even this diplomatic gathering was protected by human force. "Dr. Vasquez," he said, "I need to ask you something that's been troubling me. Your species has essentially become the galaxy's police force. Doesn't this level of responsibility concern you? The burden of maintaining peace for hundreds of different species across thousands of systems." She was quiet for a moment, studying the stars beyond the viewport. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that reminded Zethkar of Admiral Morrison's certainty during the war preparations. "Ambassador, my species has learned something that most others haven't had to confront: the cost of weakness. Throughout human history, whenever good people failed to act against evil, innocent populations paid the price. We've seen what happens when aggressor species face no meaningful resistance." She turned to face him, and he saw something in her eyes that he had learned to recognize: the thousand-yard stare that humans developed when contemplating the darker aspects of existence. "We didn't seek this responsibility," she continued, "but when we demonstrated our capability against the Korthax, we created expectations throughout the galaxy. Peaceful species began to see us as protectors, while aggressive species began to see us as obstacles. We could have withdrawn from that role, focused solely on our own defense, but that would have meant abandoning civilizations that looked to us for security. So you accepted the burden of galactic peacekeeping out of moral obligation?" "Partly, but also out of enlightened self-interest. A galaxy where aggressive species can attack peaceful ones with impunity is a galaxy where humanity will eventually face threats beyond our ability to handle alone. By maintaining peace, we create an environment where human civilization can flourish." Their conversation was interrupted by the return to session. High Arbiter Kelleth called for final statements before the formal vote on the peacekeeping proposal. "Before we proceed," Dr. Vasquez announced, "I want to address the concerns that some representatives have expressed privately about human intentions. You worry that we seek to become galactic rulers, that our peacekeeping forces are the first step toward empire." She activated a display showing the structure of human peacekeeping command. To address these concerns, humanity proposes the establishment of a Galactic Security Council with representatives from all major species. Human forces would operate under the oversight of this council, with clear mandates and regular review of all peacekeeping operations. The proposal was brilliant in its diplomatic sophistication. Rather than claiming unilateral authority, humanity was offering to submit their peacekeeping operations to multilateral oversight. It addressed sovereignty concerns while maintaining the effectiveness of human force projection. Furthermore, Dr. Vasquez continued, humanity commits to training peacekeeping forces from other species who wish to share this responsibility. Our goal is not permanent human dominance, but the development of galactic capability to maintain peace through strength. Zethkar realized he was witnessing a masterpiece of strategic thinking. Humanity was offering to share both the burden and the authority of peacekeeping, creating a system that would be sustainable even if human power eventually declined. When a vote was called, the result was overwhelming. 43 species voted in favor of formal human peacekeeping authority, with only 4 abstentions and no opposing votes. The age of human-guaranteed galactic peace had officially begun. As representatives departed to inform their governments of the historic decision, Zethkar remained in the chamber, processing what had just occurred. In less than 3 years, humanity had transformed from a minor galactic power to the primary guarantor of interspecies peace. Dr. Vasquez approached him as he stood contemplating the empty chamber. "Ambassador, you've been observing human behavior longer than any other non-human. What's your assessment of what we've accomplished here?" Zethkar considered his response carefully. "Dr. Vasquez, I believe humanity has achieved something unprecedented. The successful transition from warfare to peacekeeping while maintaining both the capability and willingness to use force when necessary. You've become what every previous galactic power failed to become. Strong enough to maintain peace, but wise enough not to abuse that strength. In the future, what do you see for human-galactic relations?" "I see the emergence of something new," Zethkar replied. "Not a galactic empire based on conquest, but a galactic civilization based on protected cooperation. Humanity has created a framework where peaceful species can flourish while aggressive species face meaningful consequences for their actions." He paused, looking out at the stars that now fell under human protection. "Your species may have solved the fundamental problem of intelligent civilization, how to balance the need for security with the desire for freedom. You've shown that peace is possible, but only when good people are willing and able to fight for it." As they parted ways, Zethkar reflected on his journey from confused observer to understanding witness. He had watched humanity transform from apparent barbarians to galactic peacekeepers, and in doing so, had learned something profound about the nature of civilization itself. The 1,000-yard stare that had initially frightened him now represented something else entirely. The look of a species that had seen the worst of what intelligent life could become and had chosen to stand guard against it. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't their military capability or technological innovation, but their willingness to bear the burden of protecting others, even at great cost to themselves. In his final report to the Galactic Council, Zethkar wrote, "Humanity represents the evolution of intelligent life beyond the simple choice between aggression and pacifism. They have achieved synthesis, the ability to be peaceful by choice and dangerous by necessity. They offer the galaxy something that has never existed before: peace guaranteed by strength, freedom protected by vigilance, and hope."